I'm 27 now. My brother Calvin is 26. We haven't spoken to our mother Emma or her husband Edward in 12 years, not since that December afternoon when we came home from school to find our clothes piled in garbage bags on the front lawn, and Edward filming the whole thing on his phone for his stupid YouTube channel. I need to write this out because what's happening right now is insane, and I keep replaying everything in my head. So buckle up because this gets wild. Back then, Mom had been married to Edward for about 8 months. He had 2 kids from his previous marriage, both around our age, and they'd been living with their actual mom until that fall. Edward was obsessed with being this big influencer dad, always filming everything, always staging these elaborate pranks and family moments for his channel. He had maybe 3,000 subscribers. Mom ate it up. She'd completely changed after she married him, started dressing differently, talking differently, acting like she was part of some aspirational lifestyle brand. That day in December, we walked up to our house and saw the bags. Edward was standing on the porch with his camera. His kids were inside the living room window eating pizza and making these loser hand gestures at us. Mom came out and told us that Edward's children needed proper bedrooms now, not the basement setup they'd been using. She said we'd been spoiled long enough with our own rooms when we should have been grateful for anything. Edward kept the camera rolling and said his biological children deserved a real music room and study space, not hand-me-down trash from kids who weren't even his. Calvin had this guitar our dad gave him before he died when we were little. It was basically the only thing he had from him. Edward walked past us, went to his truck, pulled out a sledgehammer, and just destroyed it right there in the driveway, completely smashed it to pieces. Calvin started sobbing, and I grabbed his arm to hold him back because I knew if he tried anything, we'd be screwed. Mom told us their flight to Netherlands left at 6 a.m. the next morning for Edward's work thing, and we had until dark to disappear. She said there was a church shelter on 5th Street and maybe they'd take us. I asked where we were supposed to go, what we were supposed to do, and she just laughed. She actually laughed. Then she went back inside, and they all sat down for dinner. We could see them through the window. Edward's kids were still making faces at us. Some neighbors came out. A few had their phones up recording. Nobody helped. Mrs. Patterson from next door told us we should call family services, but she didn't offer to let us inside or anything. We stood there until it got dark, and then we walked to that shelter Mom mentioned. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about being a homeless teenager. You don't exist. We spent 3 weeks in that shelter before a spot opened up in foster care. We got split up for 4 months until they found a placement that would take both of us. The couple who took us in, Frank and Laura, were decent people, but they had 3 other foster kids and everyone was just trying to survive. We aged out at 18 and 17. I worked 2 jobs through high school. Calvin did too once he turned 16. We saved everything. I had this anger inside me that never went away, never got smaller, never transformed into some peaceful acceptance like people said it would. Every single day for 12 years, I thought about what Mom and Edward did. Every birthday, every Christmas, every random Tuesday. I'd remember standing in that driveway watching Calvin cry over Dad's guitar while Edward filmed us for content. I went to community college while working full-time. Calvin worked in warehouses and did night classes. We were smart about money. We were focused. And here's the important part. I was waiting. I knew Mom and Edward would show up eventually. I knew people like them always come back when they need something. Our biological dad died when I was 8, and Calvin was 7. He had some life insurance that was supposed to go to us when we turned 25, held in a trust. Mom tried to access it when we were younger, but couldn't because of how Dad set it up. She stopped trying after she married Edward because she probably forgot about it or figured it wasn't worth the hassle. But I never forgot. I turned 25 2 years ago. Calvin turned 25 last year. That money sat there waiting for us, and we used every penny strategically. Last week, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Mom. Her voice sounded exactly the same, but older somehow. More tired. She said she'd gotten my number from some distant cousin who still had contact with her. She said she hoped I was doing well, and that she'd been thinking about me and Calvin a lot lately. I didn't say anything. I just listened. She talked for probably 5 minutes about how much time had passed and how she'd made some mistakes back then, but things were complicated with Edward's custody situation and his kids needed stability. She said she'd been young and overwhelmed. Then she got to the real reason for the call. Edward's business failed 18 months ago. They're drowning in debt. Their house is in foreclosure. Edward's kids are grown now and won't help them. His YouTube channel never went anywhere, and eventually, he quit. They've burned through their savings. Mom has some health issues that make working difficult. They need help. They need money. They were wondering if Calvin and I might be in a position to assist family. I let her finish. Then, I told her I'd need to think about it and talk to Calvin. She gave me her current number and address. I said I'd be in touch. Here's what she doesn't know. I already knew where they lived. I've known for 6 years. I've kept tabs on them the entire time. I knew when Edward's business started failing. I knew when they had to downsize from their big house to the small rental they're in now. I knew his YouTube channel died. I knew his biological kids wanted nothing to do with them after they turned 18. Calvin and I met up that same night at this diner near his apartment. When I told him Mom called, his whole face changed. He got angry immediately, started saying we should block her number and forget it. But I told him to wait. I told him this is what we'd been preparing for, even if we didn't know it. We've spent 12 years building something. We're not rich, but we're stable. We have good credit. We have savings. We have the inheritance money Dad left us. And we have options that Mom and Edward don't have. They threw us away like garbage when we were kids. They humiliated us in front of neighbors and put it on the internet. They destroyed the one thing Calvin had from our dad. They told us to go to a shelter in December and then flew to Netherlands for vacation. Calvin asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted them to feel exactly what they made us feel. Not physically, not illegally, but I wanted them to understand what it's like when the people who are supposed to protect you turn on you instead. I wanted them to know what it's like to have nothing and no one. He thought about it for a long time. Then he asked if I already had a plan. I told him I'd been thinking about various scenarios for years, but now that it was actually happening, we needed to be smart. We needed to be strategic. We needed to let them think there was hope first. So I texted Mom back 2 days later. I said Calvin and I had talked and we were willing to meet with her and Edward to discuss the situation. She responded within minutes, thanking me over and over, saying we were such good sons, saying she always knew we'd understand family takes care of family. The meeting is set for this Saturday. We're supposed to go to their rental house and talk about what kind of help we can provide. Mom has no idea what's coming. Edward has no idea. They think we're going to be their salvation. But I've been waiting 12 years for this moment. I've been angry for 12 years straight. I've built my entire adult life around being ready for when they needed something from us, and now they do. Now they're desperate, now they're scared, and I'm going to make sure they regret every single second of that December day when they threw 2 kids out into the cold and filmed it for strangers on the internet. My phone keeps going off with messages from Mom about Saturday. She keeps saying how grateful she is, how she can't wait to see us, how family is everything. Calvin is nervous. He says we need to be careful not to do anything illegal or something we'll regret. I told him we won't. We're going to do this right, we're going to do this clean, but we're doing it. This Saturday is going to change everything. I can feel it. And honestly, I've been ready for this my entire adult life. Update 1. Okay, so the meeting happened yesterday and I'm still processing everything because it went nothing like I expected. Everyone who commented on my first post asking what my plan was, I'm getting there, I promise. But this situation is way more complicated than I thought. Calvin and I drove to their rental Saturday morning. It's in this older neighborhood about 40 minutes from where we grew up. The kind of place where the houses all look the same and half the lawns haven't been mowed in weeks. Their place is a small 2-bedroom with peeling paint on the porch and a broken gutter hanging off the side. We sat in my car for probably 10 minutes before going in. Calvin kept asking if we were sure about this, if maybe we should just leave and block their numbers and move on with our lives. I reminded him about the guitar, about standing in that driveway in December, about the garbage bags and the pizza and Edward's kids making those gestures at us through the window. He nodded and we got out. Mom answered the door and I swear she looked like she'd aged 20 years. Her hair was mostly gray now, and she'd lost weight in that unhealthy way where someone just looks hollow. She hugged both of us and started crying immediately, saying she couldn't believe we were really there, saying we'd grown into such handsome men. Edward appeared behind her and he'd changed too. He was heavier, his face was redder, and he had this defeated look that I'd never seen on him before. Back when we were kids, he was always performing, always projecting this alpha energy for his camera. Now he just looked tired. They led us into their living room, which was cramped and filled with mismatched furniture that had clearly come from different places over the years. Mom offered us coffee and snacks like this was some normal family visit. We sat down on this worn couch, and they took the chairs across from us. Mom started talking first. She went through this whole speech about how she'd made mistakes, how being a parent is harder than anyone understands, how she was trying to blend 2 families and keep everyone happy. She said Edward's custody situation back then was delicate, and his ex-wife was threatening to take his kids away completely if they didn't have proper rooms and space. She said the basement wasn't suitable for them long-term, and there wasn't enough space for everyone. Edward jumped in and said his kids needed stability after their mother had basically abandoned them. He said he was trying to build a family and create content that would support everyone financially. He said sometimes hard choices have to be made and, yeah, maybe the way they handled it wasn't perfect, but they were under enormous pressure. I let them talk. Calvin was gripping the arm of the couch so hard his knuckles were white, but he stayed quiet too. We just sat there and listened to them rewrite history right in front of us. Then Mom said the thing that made my blood boil. She said she'd always assumed we'd be fine because we were resourceful boys, and she knew we'd land on our feet. She said she checked with family services a few weeks after they got back from Netherlands and was told we were placed in care, so she knew we were safe. She said she thought about reaching out over the years but didn't want to confuse us or disrupt our lives. I finally spoke. I asked her if she remembered what she said about the shelter on 5th Street. She looked confused. I said you told us to go there. You said maybe they'd take us. You laughed when Calvin asked where we were supposed to go. I asked if she remembered it was December. If she remembered Edward destroying Dad's guitar with a sledgehammer. If she remembered his kids eating pizza and making loser signs at us through the window while half the neighborhood filmed it on their phones. Mom's face went pale. She said she didn't remember it exactly like that. She said things were chaotic and emotional and everyone was upset. Edward said the guitar was an accident. He was trying to move it, and it fell. I actually laughed out loud at that. Calvin stood up and pulled out his phone. He'd found one of the old YouTube videos from Edward's channel that someone had re-uploaded to another platform after Edward deleted his account. He played it right there in their living room. You could hear Edward's voice on the video saying his biological children deserved better than hand-me-down trash. You could see him walk to his truck and pull out the sledgehammer. You could see Mom standing there with her arms crossed while Calvin sobbed. The video was only 2 minutes long, but it was everything I remembered and more. Mom started crying again. She said she was a different person then. She was under Edward's influence. She didn't know how to stand up for us. Edward got defensive and said that video was taken out of context, that we'd been causing problems at home for months before that we were disrespectful to his kids and refusing to accept the new family dynamic. He said they'd tried talking to us multiple times about moving to the basement or finding other arrangements, but we were stubborn and hostile. That's when Calvin lost it. He started yelling about how we were kids, how we were 15 and 14 years old, how we'd lost our dad, and then Mom married some guy who wanted to erase us for his YouTube channel. Edward stood up and said Calvin was twisting everything, that he'd tried to be a father figure to us, but we rejected him at every turn. Mom was crying harder now, saying everyone needed to calm down. I stayed seated. I asked them why they called us now after 12 years of silence. Mom wiped her eyes and said they needed help. They'd hit a rough patch financially, and they thought maybe we could assist them through it. Edward added that family helps family, and they'd raised us for 15 years before that incident happened. Here's where it gets interesting. I asked them what kind of help they needed specifically. Edward pulled out this folder with papers showing their debts, their mortgage foreclosure notice, their overdue medical bills for Mom's treatments. They owe almost $90,000 to various creditors. The foreclosure on their old house tanked their credit. They can barely afford the rent on this place. Mom needs some kind of ongoing treatment that's expensive even with insurance. Edward's been unable to find steady work because his field dried up and he's too old to start over easily. They want us to co-sign a loan so they can consolidate their debts, or maybe just give them money outright if we're in a position to do so. Mom mentioned she'd heard through family that we'd received our dad's life insurance money, and she hoped we'd been smart with it. Edward said they only need about $50,000 to get back on their feet, and if we could help with even part of that, they'd pay us back once they stabilized. Calvin looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. These people threw us out, destroyed our father's guitar, filmed us for their YouTube content, and now they want us to give them $50,000. But here's what happened next that I didn't expect. There was a knock on the door. Edward got up to answer it, and his daughter Elena came in. She's 28 now, a year older than me. She looked at Calvin and me and stopped in the doorway. Mom got flustered and said Elena was just stopping by. She didn't know we'd be there. Elena stared at us for a long moment. Then she said she absolutely knew we'd be there because she'd been the one who found my number through social media and gave it to Mom. She said she'd been pushing them to reach out to us for months because their financial situation was getting desperate and she couldn't help them herself. She sat down on the arm of Edward's chair and said, "We should know that their situation is partially her fault and her brother's fault." After they turned 18, both of them cut Edward off because he'd been a controlling father who tried to micromanage their lives and use them for his failed content channel. They'd both moved out at 18 and had minimal contact with him since. When Edward's business failed and he started asking them for money, they both refused. Elena said she told him he was getting what he deserved after how he treated everyone around him for years. Edward looked humiliated. Mom was crying even harder. Elena said she'd felt guilty about what happened to us back then, but She'd been a teenager dealing with her own stuff and she didn't have the power to stop it. She said she remembered that day clearly and it had bothered her for years. But she also said that Edward and Mom were genuinely struggling now, and whatever grudges existed from the past, they were still human beings who needed help. I asked Elena why she cared if we helped them when she'd cut her own father off. She said because he's still her father, and watching him spiral has been harder than she expected. She said her brother Declan feels the same way even though he won't admit it. She said they can't help financially, but they thought maybe we could, and maybe it would give everyone some closure. Calvin asked if she seriously thought we'd just hand over money to the people who threw us into the street in December when we were kids. Elena said she knew it was a lot to ask, but she was hoping we'd be better people than Edward had been, that we'd be able to show mercy where he'd shown none. The manipulation was unreal. I stood up and said we needed time to think about this. Mom grabbed my arm and said they didn't have much time, the foreclosure was moving forward, and they might lose this rental too if they couldn't catch up on back rent. Edward said if we could even help with $20,000 or $30,000, it would make a difference. Calvin and I left. We didn't say we'd help or we wouldn't. We just said we needed to process everything. We sat in my car outside their house for almost an hour. Calvin was furious about Elena showing up and doing that whole speech about mercy and closure. I was furious too, but I was also thinking, because here's what they don't know. I'm not going to give them money, but I'm not going to just walk away either. I'm going to make this worse for them. I'm going to make them think there's hope, and then I'm going to take it away the same way they took everything from us. But now Elena is involved, and that complicates things. She has my number. She's been texting me since yesterday, saying she knows what her dad did was unforgivable, but he's changed. He's broken. And helping him wouldn't be for his sake, but for ours. She said holding on to anger for 12 years will destroy us, more than it'll hurt them. I haven't responded. Calvin thinks we should block all of them and forget this ever happened. But I've been waiting 12 years for this moment, and I'm not backing down now. I just need to figure out my next move. Update 2. So things have escalated in ways I didn't predict, and honestly, I'm both satisfied and stressed at the same time. For everyone asking what my plan is, you're about to find out, but fair warning, this gets messy. Elena wouldn't stop texting me. Every day since that meeting, she's been sending these long messages about how Edward is genuinely sorry, how Mom is getting sicker, how the foreclosure deadline is approaching. She kept saying, I had the power to be the bigger person and break the cycle of hurt. On Wednesday, she sent me a photo of Mom at a medical appointment looking exhausted and frail. That crossed a line for me. I called Elena and told her to meet me at this sports bar near where I work. Calvin didn't want me meeting her alone, but I needed to handle this without him second-guessing everything. Elena showed up Thursday evening looking nervous and hopeful at the same time. We grabbed a table in the back and I laid it out for her. I told her I'd thought about their situation and I was willing to help with $30,000. Her whole face lit up and she started thanking me before I even finished. I said there were conditions. She said, of course, whatever we needed, they'd agree to anything. I said I wanted Edward to make a public video, apologizing for what he did to us 12 years ago. A real apology, not some vague statement about making mistakes. I wanted him to explain exactly what he did, show the footage of him destroying the guitar, and post it to whatever social media he still had access to. I wanted him to tag it properly so people who remembered his old channel could find it. Elena's expression changed immediately. She said that seemed excessive and humiliating. I told her it was less humiliating than being thrown out of your home as a child and having it filmed for entertainment. She said Edward would never agree to that, his pride couldn't handle it. I said then, I guess they don't need the money that badly. She tried negotiating. She said, what if he apologized privately to us instead? What if he wrote a letter? What if he made a donation to a homeless youth charity in our names? I said no to all of it. Public video or nothing. She said I was being cruel and vindictive. I said she contacted me. She brought us back into this, and these are my terms. We went back and forth for probably 30 minutes. She tried the guilt trip again about Mom's health and how stress was making it worse. She said I was essentially holding medical treatment hostage over Edward's ego. I asked her if she remembered standing in that window eating pizza while her dad destroyed Calvin's guitar. She went quiet. Then she said she was a kid too and didn't have control over what Edward did. I said she had enough control to make loser signs at us with her hands. She got up and left. She texted me later that night saying she'd talk to Edward, but she didn't think he'd agree. I said that was fine. We all have choices to make. Calvin found out about the meeting because Elena apparently messaged him too, trying to get him to talk sense into me. He came to my apartment Friday morning before work and he was angry. He said I was playing games when we should just walk away. He said offering them money with humiliating conditions was just as bad as what they did to us. I told him it was nothing like what they did to us. We were children and they were adults who chose to destroy us for content. This is them facing consequences. Calvin said he didn't want any part of it. He said the anger was eating me alive, and it had been for 12 years. He said he was angry too, but he didn't want to become like them. I asked him if he really believed that protecting their dignity was more important than making them understand what they took from us. He said he believed that continuing this cycle would destroy me regardless of what it did to them. We didn't speak the rest of Friday. That's huge for us because we talk almost every day and have since we aged out of foster care. Calvin is the only family I have that I actually trust and care about, and now this situation is putting us at odds. Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. Edward. I put it on speaker and recorded it. Not for any legal reason, but because I wanted Calvin to hear this later. Edward said Elena told him about my conditions and he wanted to explain why that wasn't possible. He said he'd already humiliated himself enough by asking us for help in the first place. He said making a public video would destroy what little professional reputation he had left and make it impossible for him to find work. He said he was genuinely sorry for what happened, but sorry doesn't need to be broadcast to the world. I asked him if he thought about our professional reputation when he posted that video 12 years ago. He said that was different. We were minors, so our faces weren't clearly shown, and it wasn't meant to harm us. I actually laughed at that. I said it was meant to entertain his subscribers by showing him getting rid of unwanted kids for his biological children's benefit. Edward got defensive. He said I was purposely misinterpreting everything, that he'd been trying to create a blended family under difficult circumstances. He said his ex-wife was threatening legal action if his kids didn't have proper rooms, that she was using their living situation against him in court. He said he made a choice to protect his biological children because he was legally obligated to provide for them in a way he wasn't legally obligated to provide for us. That's when I understood something I'd been wondering about for 12 years. It wasn't about the rooms or the music space or any of that. It was about the fact that Calvin and I weren't his kids. We were obstacles to his perfect blended family narrative. We reminded everyone, including him, that Mom had a whole life before him with our father. We were evidence that he wasn't the hero dad he wanted to portray online. Getting rid of us was about erasing that complexity so he could tell a simpler story. I told him all of this. He was silent for a long time. Then he said I could believe whatever narrative I wanted, but the reality was that he was trying to keep his family together, and sometimes that meant making impossible choices. He said he'd hoped we could move past this as adults, but clearly I was more interested in revenge than reconciliation. I told him he was right about that. I said I'd been interested in revenge since the moment he smashed Dad's guitar with a sledgehammer and filmed my brother crying. I said I'd built my entire adult life around being ready for the moment when they needed something from us. And now that moment was here, and yes, I wanted them to feel powerless and discarded the way they made us feel. Edward said, if that's how I felt, then we had nothing more to discuss. He said they'd find another way. He hung up. An hour later, Mom called. She was crying before she even said hello. She said Elena told her what happened and she couldn't believe I was being so heartless. She said she was sick. They were losing everything. And I was playing power games instead of helping family. I told her I was giving them an option. They just didn't like the terms. She said the terms were designed to be unacceptable, that I knew Edward would never agree. I said good, then she understands how it felt to be given an unacceptable option 12 years ago when she told us to go to a shelter in December. She said that was completely different. They were desperate and out of options. I said they clearly weren't desperate enough yet if Edward's pride was more important than $30,000. Mom started really crying then. She said I was torturing them. She said whatever she and Edward did wrong, they didn't deserve this. She said she'd been a good mother to me and Calvin for 15 years before that one bad decision. I asked her if she'd checked on us even once after they got back from Netherlands. She said she'd confirmed we were in foster care. I asked if she'd tried to visit or call or send a letter. She said she thought it would be confusing for us, and the social workers recommended limited contact during the adjustment period. I asked her if she fought that recommendation. She stopped talking. I told Mom that I'd make one more offer. They could take the $30,000 with the video condition, or they could take $15,000 with no conditions right now. She said $15,000 wouldn't solve their problems. I said then they needed to decide what their pride was worth. She hung up on me. Elena has been texting me nonstop since Sunday. She says I'm killing them slowly and enjoying it. She says Mom had some kind of episode Sunday night from the stress and they almost took her to the emergency room. She says their landlord gave them an eviction notice for this rental now too because they're 2 months behind. She says Declan wants to talk to me directly and she gave him my number. Calvin still isn't speaking to me. He sent one text saying he can't support what I'm doing and he needs space to figure out if he can be around me right now. That hurt more than anything Mom or Edward have said. Declan texted me Monday. He said he knows what Edward did was wrong, but I'm actively making things worse and watching them suffer. He said Elena is falling apart, feeling responsible for bringing us back into their lives. He said maybe Edward deserves this, but Mom doesn't, and Elena definitely doesn't. He said if I have any decency, I'll either help them properly or cut contact completely instead of this slow torture. I haven't responded to Declan yet. I don't know what to say, because he's not entirely wrong. I am watching them suffer, and some part of me is satisfied by it. But another part of me feels like I'm losing Calvin over this, and I don't know if that's worth it. My phone is blowing up constantly now. Mom texting about her health. Elena texting about how guilty she feels. Edward hasn't contacted me again, but Elena says he's barely speaking or eating, just sitting in their rental staring at the foreclosure papers. People in the comments on my last update said I should make them really pay, that I should destroy them completely. But now that I'm actually doing it, Calvin thinks I'm becoming the monster. Elena says I'm torturing them, and Declan says I'm cruel. Maybe they're right, or maybe this is exactly what they deserve. I don't know anymore. The only thing I know for sure is that this isn't over yet. Final update. This is going to be my last post about this situation because it's over now. Completely over. And I need to write it all out because honestly, I don't know how I feel about any of it anymore. Tuesday morning, Calvin showed up at my apartment. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He came in without saying anything, and we just sat there in my living room for probably 20 minutes in silence. Then he asked me what my actual endgame was, what I was trying to accomplish besides making them suffer. I told him the truth. I said I wanted them to understand what they did to us. I wanted them to feel powerless and desperate and abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect them. I wanted Edward to face the fact that his biological children wanted nothing to do with him, just like he'd wanted nothing to do with us. I wanted Mom to know what it felt like when someone you love chooses someone else over you. I wanted them both to be exactly where we were 12 years ago, homeless, broke, and forgotten. Calvin said that was the most honest thing I'd said since this whole thing started. He said he understood the anger because he felt it too, every single day. But he asked me if destroying them would actually make that December day hurt less, if it would bring back Dad's guitar, if it would give us back those years in foster care, if it would undo any of the damage. I said no, but at least they'd know what they did had consequences. Calvin said they already knew. He said they were living the consequences right now, and we didn't have to be the ones delivering them. We talked for hours, really talked, not just argued. Calvin told me he'd been having nightmares about that day again ever since Mom called. He said he'd worked hard to put it behind him, not because he forgave them, but because carrying that anger around was exhausting. He said watching me orchestrate their suffering was bringing it all back, and he couldn't handle it. I asked him what he wanted me to do. He said he wanted me to make a choice. Either help them with no conditions and actually try to move forward, or tell them definitively that we're not helping and cut all contact. He said this middle ground where I'm dangling hope in front of them while making demands I know they can't meet was torture for everyone, including me. That conversation changed something. Not because Calvin convinced me to forgive them or anything like that, but because I realized he was right that I'd been operating in this space where I wasn't satisfied by either option, helping them or abandoning them. So I'd created this third option that just prolonged everyone's suffering. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to their rental alone. Mom answered the door, and she looked worse than the week before. She tried to hug me, and I stepped back. I told her I needed to talk to her and Edward together. She called for him, and we sat in that same cramped living room. I told them I'd made a decision. Mom immediately started thanking me, assuming I was going to help. I said no, let me finish. I said I'd spent 12 years angry about what they did to us. I'd spent 12 years waiting for the moment when they'd need something from me so I could make them feel what I felt. And now that moment had arrived and I'd realized something important. Edward asked what that was. I said I'd realized that I didn't actually want to help them, but I also didn't want to keep doing this back and forth. So here's what was going to happen. I wasn't giving them any money. Not $30,000 with conditions, not $15,000 without conditions, not a single dollar. They were on their own. But I also wasn't going to keep engaging with their attempts to manipulate or guilt me into changing my mind. Mom started crying immediately. She said I was sentencing them to homelessness, that they'd end up on the street just like they'd put us on the street. I said yes, exactly like that, except they're adults who made active choices that led here, and we were children who had no choice at all. Edward stood up and said I'd been playing games this whole time with no intention of helping. He said I'd given them false hope and watched them debase themselves, begging for help I never planned to give. I told him he was absolutely right. I said every conversation, every condition, every moment of hope was designed to make him feel powerless. I said I wanted him to experience what it was like to desperately need something from someone who has the power to give it but chooses not to. He called me vindictive and cruel. I said, yes, I am. I said I'd been vindictive for 12 years and I'd been waiting for this. I said he destroyed my brother's guitar for YouTube content and threw us out in December, so forgive me if I don't feel guilty about letting him drown in debt he created for himself. Mom got hysterical. She started saying I was killing her, that the stress was making her condition worse, that I'd have her death on my conscience. I stood up and told her she didn't get to use her health as a weapon against me. I said she made her choice 12 years ago and I was making mine now. Edward moved toward me, and for a second I thought he was going to get physical, but he just stood there. He said, I'd regret this, that karma would come for me eventually, that treating family this way would destroy me from the inside. I told him I'd already been destroyed from the inside when I was 15 years old standing in a driveway in December holding garbage bags while my mother laughed and told me to go to a shelter. I walked out. Mom was screaming after me about how heartless I was, how I'd turned into a monster. Edward followed me outside and said I was just like him, that I'd become exactly what I hated. I told him the difference was that he targeted children who couldn't defend themselves, and I was targeting an adult who made his own choices. I got in my car and left. Elena started blowing up my phone within the hour. She said I'd traumatized Mom and Edward was talking about giving up completely. She said their eviction was proceeding, the foreclosure was final, and they had nowhere to go. She said I'd gotten what I wanted, and I should feel proud of myself for kicking people when they're down. I texted back that she should ask her father about the video of him destroying a guitar with a sledgehammer while 2 kids cried. I said she should ask him about making his biological children more important than the stepchildren who'd already lost their father. I said if she wanted to be angry at someone, she should be angry at Edward for the choices that led to this moment. She responded that 2 wrongs don't make a right, and I was using childhood trauma to justify adult cruelty. She said she'd tried to help bridge the gap between us, and all I'd done was make everything worse. She said she hoped I could live with myself, then she blocked me. Declan sent one text Thursday. He said he understood why I did what I did, but he thought I'd made the wrong choice. He said he didn't blame me, but he couldn't respect it either. He said his father was broken and his mother was broken and Elena was broken and maybe I was too. He said everyone in this situation was damaged, and the only thing I'd accomplished was spreading more damage around. Then he blocked me too. Friday, Calvin came over again. I told him what I'd done. He asked how I felt. I said I didn't know. He said that was probably the most honest answer I could give. We ordered food and watched basketball and didn't talk about Mom or Edward or any of it. Saturday morning, I woke up to a Facebook message from someone I didn't know. She said she was Edward's sister, my former aunt, I guess, and she wanted me to know that Mom and Edward had moved in with her temporarily while they figured things out. She said they'd lost everything and were starting over from nothing. She said she didn't know the full history, but she hoped I understood the consequences of my choices. She said Edward was talking about bankruptcy and Mom wasn't doing well at all. I didn't respond. I don't plan to. Calvin asked me yesterday if I felt like I'd gotten what I wanted. I said I thought I would feel victorious or satisfied or justified, but mostly I just feel tired. He said that's probably because revenge doesn't actually fix anything. It just makes you realize that the thing you wanted fixed can't be fixed by hurting someone else. I asked him if he thought I was wrong to refuse to help them. He said no. We didn't owe them anything, and they'd earned their situation. But he said the way I went about it, the psychological games and the dangling hope, that was something different. He said that was me trying to make them suffer the exact way we suffered, and he wasn't sure that made me better than them. I've been thinking about that a lot, because he's not wrong. I wanted them to suffer. I did make them think there was hope, and then I took it away. I did enjoy watching Edward realize his biological kids wanted nothing to do with him. I did feel satisfaction when Mom cried about losing everything. And now they're living with Edward's sister in who knows what situation. Broke and desperate and probably talking about how their horrible stepson refused to help them in their time of need. They're probably painting themselves as victims of my cruelty. And maybe they're not completely wrong about that. But here's what I keep coming back to. They threw 2 children out in December. They filmed it for YouTube. They destroyed the one thing my brother had from our dead father with a sledgehammer. They told us to go to a shelter and then flew to Netherlands. And when they came back, they didn't check on us beyond confirming we were in the system. For 12 years, they didn't reach out until they needed money. So yeah, I refused to help them. I made them think I might and then I didn't. I let them feel powerless and desperate. And I don't think I'm wrong for that, even if I'm not proud of how I did it. Calvin and I are okay. It's not the same as before, but we're talking again and he's not angry at me anymore. He said he understands why I did what I did, even if he wouldn't have done it himself. He said we're different people and we process that December day differently, and that's okay. Mom hasn't contacted me again. Neither has Edward. Elena and Declan blocked me. Edward's sister sent one more message asking if I'd reconsider helping, even a little bit, but I didn't respond and she stopped. I don't know what happens to them now. I don't know if they'll recover financially or if they'll end up actually homeless or what. And honestly, I don't think I care. That probably makes me a bad person, but I spent 12 years being angry and now I'm just done. Someone in my first post comment said I should make them pay for what they did. I think I did. Someone else said revenge wouldn't make me feel better. They were right too. Both things are true. I'm not looking for judgment or advice anymore. I just needed to write this all out because it's over now. And I needed to mark that somehow. They're out of my life. I made sure they understood exactly what they did to us and exactly how little their suffering means to me after what they put us through. Calvin said something yesterday that I keep thinking about. He said the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. He said, I've been hating them for 12 years and now maybe I can work toward just not caring at all. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but at least I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not planning or preparing for the moment when they need me. That moment came and went, and now it's done. That December day when I was 15, I whispered to Calvin to memorize their faces. I said every single one like it was a promise. I kept that promise. They know now that I remembered everything and that I chose not to help when I could have. They know what it feels like to be thrown away by someone who has the power to save you. And yeah, maybe that makes me just as bad as them. But at least I can live with that.